Well, the title of today's message is You Feed Them. Turn to your neighbor and say, You feed them. You feed them. Come with a bit more gusto, a bit more enthusiasm. You feed them. Have you ever stopped to think and look and notice that so much of Jesus' ministry was done through the mundane? It wasn't about the next big event, the big conference, the CD launch, the book release, or a new preaching series that Jesus was putting together. So much of Jesus' ministry was done just on the way. Just ordinary life. He didn't make an event of it. So much of modern Christianity has become like event-driven. But God's not about just specific events. He wants to use us in the day-to-day. And so much of what Jesus did was outworked going from one place to another, in the ordinary, in the day-to-day, in the mundane. He came to where people were at and he met them there. He met them in the middle of crisis. He met them in the middle of questioning. He met them in the middle of struggle. He met them in the middle of brokenness. Wherever they were, Jesus was who he was each and every single time that he met them, and he got involved with their stuff. He comes to you at your workplace. We see this with Simon and Andrew, that they receive the call of God to come follow him as they're working, as they're mending their nets, as they're about their day-to-day. It wasn't this big call. You see the call go out to Matthew as he's sitting where? In the tax collector booth. Jesus, as he's walking past, engages people where they're at. Jesus comes during domestic duties. He comes to the woman at the well collecting water. And he gets involved with Mary and Martha as they have a dispute over some houseworking issues. He comes into the middle of our mess. He comes to where we are and gets involved. Jesus gets involved in family and marriage. He wants to hang with the kids. He says, no, let the children come to me. He gets involved in his community as he goes out into all his world and he says, let them come to me. He stirs up family concepts, asking things like, who is my mother and who is my brother? Walking from one place to another, the Pharisees try to trap him in his words, and they begin to question him about marriage and divorce, and Jesus gets involved. He didn't wait to a marriage seminar to address the issue, yet those things are good. But Jesus gets involved in our lives where we're at, along the way, along the path. There he is in the middle of the conversation, in the walking and in the doing life. He's there in the middle of your argument. He's there in the middle of your confusion, your despondency, of your questioning. He's there in the middle, and he comes to you in the day-to-day, in the ordinary. Jesus even comes to meet us at church. Whoa, would you believe? Sometimes not just bringing blessings, sometimes he comes to overturn the tables of religion in our lives and to unsettle things a little bit and make us aware of some priorities that he has that maybe we've drifted from. Jesus comes as he travels, walking and talking. From one town to another, we see healings. We see miracles. We see teachings and not planned, just life, just going from one place to another, just on the way. Jesus is who he is, wherever he is, and whatever he is doing. He seeks to bring who he is into the mix so that we can take great courage that no matter where we are, Jesus is there in the way. And he gets involved in the lives of people just as they do life, and he asks us to do the same. It's not in the big events, it's often in the ordinary, the on the way. The word that God gave to us as a community this year is from Romans chapter 12 that we talked about a lot throughout the year, that Just in the eating and the sleeping, just in the coming and in the going, God wants us to be who he's called us to be. And Jesus paints this picture for us. If we read the gospel from start to finish, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we see that Jesus just went about doing good, the word says. He just went about doing good wherever he was. And he says, I want you now to just go and do the same. So often we're looking for the big things, but often the big things that God's wanting to do is outwork through the little things. Through the kind word, through the prayer, through the waking up in the morning and saying, God, would you help me to see people as I go out into my world today? Let me not just walk past them as an inconvenience on my way to do task. God's found there in the coming and the going. It was as Jesus and his disciples were on their way from somewhere to somewhere that we see an incredible miracle that has great application for us today. Jesus just finds out that his cousin is dead. He's been killed. In fact, he's been beheaded and mocked and ridiculed. And they're in the middle of a large crowd when Jesus is told this devastating news. And so to try and get some space and to get some reprieve and to get some air and some oxygen, they leave the large crowd to go and try and get some space and get away from it all. But on their way from leaving a crowd, they in fact walk themselves into yet another crowd. I want to read to you from Matthew chapter 14, verse 13 to 21. And this is our key text for this morning. When Jesus heard what had happened to his cousin, John the Baptist, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed the sick. He's trying to get away from the crowd. He's trying to just get some space. Bad stuff's just gone down. I just need to collect my thoughts. And yet here he is, gone from one crowd and finds just another crowd before him. And yet he has compassion on them. Healed their sick. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. You feed them." Disciples replied, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. And one account of this story goes on to say, "And what is that amongst so many? Bring them here to me." Don't miss the simplicity. Don't miss the power in the simplicity of those words. Bring them here to me. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looking up to heaven. He gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. And then they all ate. They all ate and were satisfied. The disciples picked up, there wasn't just enough. He's the God of more than enough. It wasn't just everyone was satisfied, and yet they picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. A lot of people fed on so little. Jesus and the disciples were on the way, and in their hearts and in their minds, they weren't going towards a crowd. They were leaving one and try and get a bit of space, a bit of peace and quiet, a bit of reprieve. To just get a moment alone when life happened. And an opportunity presented, and Jesus was all up in it. As a huge need presented itself, the disciples tried to distance themselves from the need. They try to remove themselves from the equation. Often in life, I can leave God out of the equation when I'm confronted with great lack and need and go, God, it's so big, it's so beyond me. What could I possibly do? It's just too big. I can see that that's such a big need, and it'd be wonderful to be able to do something, to bring something positive to that, to contribute something that would bring about change, but yet it's so big, it's so beyond me. And in doing so, I limit God's ability to move through my life and to do something powerful and to bring about a miracle, because I say, God, it can't be done, it's just too big. Seems like a lost cause. But that's the space where God does some of his best work. When we recognize that it is beyond us, that's the space where God can now come and do what only he can do, where he can turn it all around. So often we get confused that when we look at things and we look at our own inability to be able to do the task, we miss out on seeing God's ability to do on our behalf that which we can't do and that which only he can do. But for Jesus to be able to do a miracle, we first need to acknowledge the need. It's in verse 15. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a very remote place and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Now, they hadn't even yet invited Jesus into the space, but they saw the people. They saw the hunger. They saw the need and understood that they didn't have what was required. But for Jesus to be able to move in and through our lives, we first need to see and acknowledge the need. The city that we've been placed in, Caloundra, has profound needs. There are people that live in and around about us that have profound needs. Do you see it? Are you aware of it? Are you like the disciples that can see, yeah, there's a lot of people here, it's late, they're hungry, they need something. I'm not sure we can do it, but they saw the need. Incredible and profound needs that are, to be honest, beyond us. Beyond just you and just I. What could we possibly do? What could we possibly bring? But do you see the need? Do you acknowledge the need, or have we become so indifferent, so busy that we walk past it and we don't even see it or acknowledge it? I wonder though, can you relate to the disciples' response? The need is so beyond them that they distance themselves from being a part of the miracle. They say, "Send the crowds away." Jesus, send them away. It's too much. There's too many people. It's so late. We've got nothing. Just send them away. But Jesus was having none of it. Listen to his response. Verse 16. Jesus said, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." Don't you love that about Jesus? That he's not at all interested in your reasonings. You ever noticed that? But Jesus, just sit down for a minute. Let me tell you why it can't happen. I just want to bring you up to speed with some current realities that you might have overlooked in this situation. Because I don't know if you see the sheer volume of people here compared to such small and insignificant resource. I mean, Jesus, there's not even enough food for us. And so often we feel the need to inform Jesus of what he already knows and to try and bring him up to speed so we can distance ourselves from being part of the solution. He ignores our why we can't and invites us into understand his why he can. Did you get that this morning? It's a bit, I don't know if that's great English, but did you get that this morning? He ignores our why we can't, encourages and invites us to come to understand his why he can. Jesus charged the disciples with the responsibility of feeding them. Because even though they saw the need, they had no intention whatsoever of being part of the solution. They said, surely the people are hungry, send them away, let someone else deal with it. But Jesus doesn't let the disciples get away with that. Jesus doesn't let you and I get away with that. He says to them, he says to you, he says to I, you feed them. You are responsible for the needs that you walk into. For Jesus to be able to move in us and through us, we first need to hear and acknowledge the need that is around about us and understand that Jesus has called each and every single one of us to be part of the solution. We are called to Caloundra for the work that God is wanting to do in Caloundra. For the people that live in Caloundra, those profound needs that are here in our city. And Jesus is not letting us just send them away because the need's so big and what I have is so little. No. He's not letting us send them away. He's sending us out into them, towards the need. Jesus says, you feed them. Your responsibility. You're part of the solution. You could be the catalyst here. You go. I wonder, what is Jesus asking of us? I wonder what Jesus is asking of you. Are we prepared to follow the call of Jesus to go towards the need instead of pushing it away for somebody else to deal with? Send them to the other town. Send them to the other church. Somebody else can deal with that. So often we can fail to move because we are so focused on what we don't have that we fail to see and give that which we do have. Come on, Jesus, really? Look what we've got. It's just, it's not even like close. You know, sometimes you're like, oh, we might be able to stretch it. You've said that and go, we might be able to stretch it a little bit. We might be able to get there. This is a lot of stretching that's required here with so little and so much is needed. Verse 17, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. What we have often is so small compared to what it's going to take to do this thing called life. And Jesus comes into all of our inadequacies and calls us to do and go beyond what we think is possible. The question Jesus asks, though, is not for you to inform him of what you don't have. Jesus doesn't ask you for what you don't have. He only ever asks us for what we do have. What do you have? I wonder this morning, do you have a couple of fish? Do you have a few loaves of bread? Do you have something that you could give into the hand of God, that you could go, God, I've got something. I don't have everything. I don't know if I can be the complete answer here, but God is asking you not what you don't have, but what do you have? So often what we have seems so insignificant, what is required, that we automatically disqualify ourselves from being used of God. It's the prophet who asked the widow who was in dire need, and he said to her, what do you have in the house? Her situation was so bad. She said, I'm just going to cook a cake, a loaf of bread. I'm just going to cook some bickies up, and we're going to eat it and die. And he says to her, what do you have in the house? And she says, I've got a little oil. Just got a little bit of oil. He says, bring it out. And from that, she brought what she had and gave it over and trusted God. We see an incredible miracle. Jesus asks you and I today, not what don't you have, what do you have? And to go and get it and bring it to me. Verse 18, Jesus said, bring them here to me. Bring them here to me. Once again, don't miss the power of the simplicity of those words. Bring them here to me. When we've got and it's little and it's not enough, would you just bring what you got here to me? When you feel like you've run out of gas and you've given everything that you could and you're on your last legs, would you just take what you've got and would you bring it here to me? When you feel like you've beat down and you've been praying so hard, asking God to move in this situation, and it's been going on and on and on, and you feel like I've got so little, Jesus said, bring it here to me. Don't just hold on to it. Don't just acknowledge the need. Don't just see the gap between what you have and what is required. Don't just say this is what we've got. He says, no, now that you've acknowledged the need, now that you've seen what you've got, and a miracle is going to need to take place, don't get me wrong, but now that you see what you've got in your hand, would you bring it here to me? Stop looking at what you don't have and bring in faith what you do have. Bring them here. Jesus is saying to so many of us today in so many areas of our lives, would you just bring it here to me? I know that it's little. I know that you're weak. I know that you're feeble. I know that you're confused. I know that you think that you can't. I know that you've been praying for that health issue for so long. I know that finances are so tight. I know that you thought you were going here, but you're going there. Jesus said, would you bring it here to me? For Jesus to move in us and through us, we need not only to know what we have, but also to give to him that which we do have. You'd be forgiven for thinking, what's the point of taking what I've got when it's not even going to scratch the surface? But here's where Jesus steps in. Verse 19. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people, and they all ate and were satisfied. The disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Anytime we bring what we have to the feet of Jesus in obedience to what he's asking us to do, anytime, any situation, any circumstance, anytime we bring to him, he multiplies it. Anytime we give the little that we have, God moves. It's only as we first see, it's only as we first acknowledge the need, it's only as we first respond, it's only as we first look and go, I don't have much, but this is what I do have. It's only there in that space that their God can now move and bring about a miracle. So little turned into so much through the faith, trust, and obedience of the disciples and the power of Jesus. Just a little. Jesus said, just the faith of a mustard seed sees massive mountains moved out of the way. Just a little. So often we want Jesus to move at the start, don't we? Like at the start of the miracle, and go, God, look, there they are. Just would you take care of them and feed them all? But first he says, do you see the need? Do you see the need? Will you serve the need? Don't send them away. Don't push back at the need. Don't push back. Don't sit in doubt and fear and question. You feed them. You be part of the solution. What do you have? He's asking us today, what do you have in your hand? Would you bring it to me? And then Jesus moves. After we've moved in obedience and faith, it's then Jesus moves in power. It's after we've engaged, there Jesus performs a miracle. Gathering Jesus has charged us with a responsibility that is so beyond us to love this city. And what it requires of us is so much bigger than what we collectively have. But Jesus doesn't ask us this morning for what we don't have. He only ever asks us for what we do have. And this morning, this goes for our marriages, our relationships, our finances, our health, and the call of God, both individually and corporately. Maybe this morning you're looking up at like a wall, like Jericho, they're facing. It's so big and it's so beyond you. It's so caught up in the magnitude of the task ahead of us that we lose sight of the size of our God. Jesus says to us in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the confusion, in the middle of the magnitude of the task at hand, he says it's your responsibility, but would you bring it